Okay, now we want to look at what the signs are of the functions are, of the trig functions are in each quadrant. Okay, and to do this, we want to think about the coordinates in each quadrant. If I have a point in the first quadrant, the x coordinate's positive, the y coordinate's positive, right? So I would, if I were drawing an angle over here, I'd go over and up, and they would both be positive, okay? So here is the angle. This would be the adjacent side. This would be the opposite side. This would be the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always positive, okay? So if I look at the sine of this angle, opposite over hypotenuse, positive. Cosine, positive. Tangent, positive over positive is positive. So in quadrant 1, all the functions are positive, okay? Now, quadrant 2, what happens over in the second quadrant? Well, the second quadrant, we have a negative x coordinate and a positive y coordinate. So we go over in a negative direction, so that's negative. Then we go up, that's positive. Here's our hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always positive. So here's my angle. What happens? Opposite over hypotenuse is going to be positive over positive. That's positive. Cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, is going to be negative over a positive. So this is going to be negative. Tangent is going to be a positive over a negative. That's going to be negative. So the only one that's positive in the second quadrant is sine. The only one that's positive. I'm not sure I said that right. The only one that's positive in the second quadrant is sine because it's a positive over a positive. Okay? Third quadrant. Third quadrant, both coordinates are negative, right? So I go to the left, that's negative. I go down, that's negative. Remember, your hypotenuse is always positive. So if here's my angle, sine, opposite, that's negative, over hypotenuse. Negative over positive is going to be negative. Cosine is going to be negative. But tangent is going to be a negative over a negative, which becomes a positive. So the only one that's positive in the third quadrant is tangent. And then in the fourth quadrant, we have a positive x coordinate and a negative y coordinate, right? So here's going to be my triangle right here. What's going to be positive here? Looks like the only thing that's going to be positive is this adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Positive over that's going to be positive. So cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant. Now, it's also important to note the reciprocal functions have the same sign as the original. So for this one, since sine is positive, that would mean cosecant is also positive. If cosine is positive, secant is also positive. If tangent's positive, cotangent's positive. The reciprocal functions have the same sign as the original functions because all you do is take the reciprocal, okay? Now, here's one way to remember which trig functions are positive in which quadrant. If you go quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4, this particular lady who wrote this, she says all students, that'd be for sine, take for tangent, calculus, C, cosine, okay? All students take calculus. I've also heard it all seniors take calculus, but all of them are positive, sine is positive, tangent's positive, cosine's positive. Something you can reason to, but if you have that memorized, might make things a little easier. Okay, so if the tangent is positive, which quadrant could the angle be in? Well, where is tangent positive? All of them are positive in quadrant 1. Tangent's also positive in quadrant 3. So our answer here would be 1 or 3. Okay? Look at number 2. If secant is negative, secant. Now, what does secant have to do with? Secant is the reciprocal function of cosine. So if secant is negative, that also means cosine's negative, right? So where is cosine negative? Well, cosine's not negative here. Cosine is going to be negative in quadrant 2 because the only one in quadrant 2 that's positive is sine. And it's also going to be negative here. So it looks like quadrants 2 and 3. All right, so I want you to reason through these next two, see if you can come up with the answer to the questions, then turn the video back on to check. All right, number 3, I got that sine is positive in quadrant 1 because they're all positive in quadrant 1, and quadrant 2 because that's the S part. The fourth one says that cosine's negative, so I just rewrote that, and cotangent is positive. Well, cotangent is the reciprocal function to tangent, so I looked for where is cosine negative and tangent positive. Well, tangent's positive in the first quadrant, right? In the third quadrant. But in the first quadrant, everything's positive, so cosine can't be positive. So I said that quadrant 3 is where that angle would have to lie for cosine to be negative and cotangent to be positive. We've talked about coterminal angles. Now we're going to talk about reference angles. So they talk about an angle in standard form, which is what we've been dealing with, and the reference angle is the positive acute angle formed by the terminal side and the x-axis. That's important. So you draw the angle like here, and then wherever the terminal side between that and the x-axis, that's the reference angle, that little leftover part between the terminal side and the x-axis. So at 225 degrees, first thing you want to do is draw a 225 degree angle. So that is 180 plus 45. So I'm going to go 180 degrees plus another 45. So that's going to split quadrant 3 in half. That is a 225 degree angle. The reference angle is this part right here, okay, between the terminal side and the x-axis. Well, that's the 45 degrees, right? Because this is 180, this is 45. So that part right there is the reference angle. So the reference angle is 45 degrees. Now, what about negative 310 degrees? So negative 310, if I go all the way around, would be negative 360, right? So all the way around would be negative 360. I've got to back it up. How much? 50 degrees. So negative 310 is right here. That's negative 310. What is the reference angle? The reference angle is that between the terminal side and the x-axis. How much is that? It's 50 degrees, right? It's always positive. They told us it's positive, and it's the distance between not the distance, it's the angle measure between the terminal side and the x-axis. All right, remember the other day, or another video, when we were talking about the 30, 60, 45 degree measures and the trig functions. This is when we need them, okay? So if you don't have them memorized, you are going to want to know that your 45, 45, remember, is A, and A root 2, and your 30, 60 triangle is going to be A root 3, and 2A, right? So that's going to be important. If you don't have them memorized, you're going to need to know that, okay? That's going to come up here, because here's what we're going to do, okay? We need the sine of 150 degrees. We need the exact value. This means do not plug it into your calculator, okay? We do not want a decimal. We want an exact value. So here's what you do. You're going to draw a 150 degree angle. That's going to be right here, right? Then you're going to find your reference angle. What's your reference angle here? If that angle is 150 degrees, that reference angle is 30 degrees. Well, what's the sine of 30 degrees? Well, the sine of 30 degrees, you can look down here, opposite over hypotenuse, A over 2A would be 1/2. So we're going to say 1/2. But you've got to look for the quadrant you're in. We are in quadrant 2. And is sine positive or negative in quadrant 2? Well, remember, all seniors take calculus. So in quadrant 2, sine is positive, so this is going to be positive 1/2. Okay? All right. Tangent of 300. First thing you want to do is draw a 300-degree angle. Well, 300 degrees goes all the way around. What's your reference angle? Your reference angle is 60, right? If you go around 300 degrees, you've got 60 degrees left. So we want the tangent of 60 degrees. So you either have it memorized or you can draw your little triangle like I did right here. Tangent of 60 would be a root 3 over a, which is going to be the square root of 3. But we need to know the signs, okay? In the fourth quadrant, because that's where we've ended up here, in the fourth quadrant, is tangent positive or negative? Okay, well, let's see. All seniors take calculus. That means cosine is the only thing that's positive over here. Cosine and secant, it's reciprocal function. So the tangent would be negative. It's important that we figure out the sign. Okay? All right, let me do one more with you and then let you try some on your own. So 225 degrees. Where is 225 degrees? Well, that's going to be 180 plus another what? 45? Okay, so that means my reference angle is 45 degrees because I went 180 plus another 45. So I need the cosine of 45 degrees. So let's look. Adjacent over hypotenuse, that is a over a root 2. So that's going to be 1 over root 2. We would have to rationalize that, and we would get root 2 over 2. But we need to check the sign. What is cosine in the third quadrant? All seniors take. Tangent is the only one that's positive over here, so the cosine would be negative. All right? So you may want your notes out where we filled out the trig functions of all the special angles, the 45, the 30, and the 60, or you can use these triangles down here, whatever works for you, but you try to do numbers 8, 9, and 10. When you get done, turn it back on, check your work. All right, here's what I got. Cotangent of 315, my reference angle is 45. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, and the tangent of 45 is 1, so the cotangent is 1. In the fourth quadrant, all seniors take calculus, only cosine is positive, so that would be negative. Number 9 ends up being the same thing as 10. Those would be coterminal angles, right? One of them went down this way, one went all the way around, but they ended up in the same place. And so the tangent of negative 45 degrees ends up being the same thing as the cotangent of 315 degrees. Number 10, I have negative 315 degrees. So when I did that, my reference angle is 45. The secant is the, hold on a second. I messed that up. The secant is going to be the reciprocal of cosine. The cosine of 42, the cosine of 45 is 1 over root 2, right, which gives you the root 2 over 2. So the secant of 45 is the square root of 2. I messed that up. I didn't do the reciprocal. So the secant of 45 is root 2. Everything is positive in the first quadrant. All right, so if you have any questions, jot them down, and we'll talk about it.